The scimitar was shaking more and more uncontrollably. Shilian was at a loss on what to do and gently stroked down the spine of the blade. I'm sorry, I didn't see it was you. I won't do it again, he said. After he stroked it a few times, a Ming squinted its eye and the trembling finally stopped. Shilian then asked, "Where's your master?" Suddenly, a voice came from behind. "Pay it no mind." Shilian looked back and immediately rose to his feet, surprised and delighted. "San Lang, why have you come?" he asked. Behind him was a youth who approached easily, with an air of playful arrogance. It was Hua Chang. He had tied his black hair up into a crooked ponytail again. He was dressed in a white tunic with his red outer robe tied around his waist. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing those pale white but firm arms, as well as the tattoo on one of them. As he walked, the little silver bells on his boots chimed, sounding quite mellow. He looked very much like a strapping young lad of the village, but exceedingly carefree. A piece of reed grass hung from his lips, and he smiled at Shilian. "Gurgur," he greeted. Shilian had originally planned on visiting Hua Chang to give his proper thanks after settling the two children, but Hua Chang himself showed up instead. Lazily, Hua Chang came up next to him and pulled out that silver scimitar from the ground with just one hand. He looked it over, then lifted it to rest on his shoulder. "Gurgur is busy here. There's no need to trouble you to make a trip over there, so I came over myself. You also forgot this," he said. There was actually a bamboo hat carried on his back, and he removed it to give it to Shilian. This was forgotten back at the mansion of that wealthy merchant, and Shilian was slightly taken aback. He then immediately said, "I completely forgot about it. Thanks for going through the trouble." Just as the words left his mouth, he suddenly remembered what he told Hua Chang after that something that had happened the night before. He had said, "I'm looking for my bamboo hat. My bamboo hat is missing." It was nonsense uttered out of confusion, but Hua Chang actually went and found the bamboo hat for him. Shilian felt a wave of embarrassment, afraid that Hua Chang was going to tease him for it. Fortunately, Hua Chang didn't even mention the incident and changed the subject with a smile. "Gurgur picked up 2 more kids," he said as he patted Guzi's head, ruffling his hair into a mess. Guzi seemed to be scared of him, rushing to hide behind Shilian. Shilian chided, "Don't worry, this Gurgur is a good person." However, Hua Chang said, "Nah, I'm a very bad person." Although that was what he said, still he flicked his hand and a tiny silver butterfly was flipped out of his sleeve, fluttering its little wings, flying errantly towards Guzi. Guzi's inky little eyes bulged. He stared at the tiny silver butterfly with an unmoving gaze, and finally he reached out to try to catch it in spite of himself. With that, his guard against Hua Chang was greatly dropped. Then Hua Chang nonchalantly swept his eyes over Lang Ying, but his gaze was significantly different. When he looked at Lang Ying, his eyes were cold and sharp, unkind and unfriendly. Lang Ying lowered his head and also shrank back behind Shilian anxiously. Shilian held the bamboo hat in his hand and said, "If you're gonna come, just come. What are you doing cleaning Puchi Shrine?" "It's nothing more than some house cleaning. Don't you think everything feels so much more refreshing now that all the trash is cleared out?" Hua Chang asked. Shilian remembered the missing Qirong and wondered, did Hua Chang actually throw him out like he's garbage? Just then, there was a sudden wail from behind Puchi Shrine. Hua Chang, you fucker. Go to hell and get boiled in a pot of frying oil. Murder! Hua Chang is committing ghost murder. Guzi cried, Dad! His 2 little legs ran, rushing over, and Shelian hastily followed too. There was a small creek behind Poochie's shrine. It was where he usually did his laundry and washed rice. At the moment, Chirong was also being dunked in the water, his body bound tightly by Ruoye. He was desperately keeping his head above water and roaring with all of his might. I won't get out. I refuse to get out. I will stay in this body until it dies. I won't surrender. Hua Chang spat out that piece of weed grass. You take yourself for some kind of hero? Useless trash. Shelian explained woefully. I captured him a few days ago on some mountain. He's possessing someone else and won't come out. The man is still alive, so if we forcibly rip out the soul, the flesh won't survive. Honestly, does San Lang have any idea on what we can do? Hua Chang replied, You want ideas on how to make him suffer a fate worse than death? There's plenty. That was obviously a threat. Chirong cursed. The 2 of you, broken pot matching a rotten cover, hearts of snakes and scorpions. He hadn't finished before he was submerged in the creek again. Although whenever Shelian saw him, he'd remember how his mother's corpse was dissolved into ashes and would be filled with anguish. Still, that body belonged to another, and so it must be conserved. Thus, he fished Chirong up from the creek and dragged him to the front door of Poochie's shrine. Chirong hadn't eaten for a full day and night, so his stomach was shriveled from hunger. After having been bullied by Hua Chang, he was full of rage, but he had no energy. He wolfed down the meat pies that Guzi had snuck back from the wealthy merchant's house, leaving not a single crumb, appearing truly wretched and pathetic. Shelian shook his head. He noticed that Chirong's limbs were stiff, probably from some petrification spell cast by Hua Chang. Shelian called out, Ruoye, return. Ruoye had spent days binding Chirong and was already feeling extremely aggrieved. With the call, it immediately whooshed over and wrapped itself in loops around Shelian's whole body like a white snake. Shelian pushed open the door and comforted Ruoye as he did so, untying it from his person. All right, he said. I'll give you a bath in a bit. Don't feel bad. Go play on the side. Thus, Ruoye dragged its bandages and dejectedly floated to the side. Hua Chang had also casually tossed Ming, and Ming itself assumed a dignified pose upon landing. On the wall, Ruoye suddenly discovered a silver, shimmering scimitar leaning next to it, and very carefully approached. That eye on the hilt of the scimitar, Ming, also twirled and looked over, its gaze calculating. Feng Xin somberly didn't move, making no show of acknowledging anything. Shelian had been spending these past few days studying up on cooking, and felt that he might have gained quite the insight, his heart full of confidence. Wanting to show off his skills and host Hua Chang properly, Shelian kept him for a meal. Naturally, Hua Chang agreed to it cheerfully. When they returned from town, Shelian had bought a bunch of groceries, and he piled them all on the altar. Picking up the butcher's knife, he chopped and sliced, clinking and clanking the pots. The altar table could be used as a desk, a kitchen island, and also a dining table. Cutlery could be set. Kids could all sit around. Truly, it was a table of 100 uses. Hua Chang leaned against the wall and watched for a bit. Finally, he couldn't watch any more and spoke up. Do you need help? Shelian was at the height of his fervor and dismissed him. No need, just Ruoye's help is plenty. Then he threw out a few bundles of firewood that hadn't yet been chopped. Like an attacking viper, the white silk bandage whipped at the logs, and the chunks of wood that were as thick as thighs were instantly chopped into thin sticks of kindling. Having shown off its skills, Ruoye arched into an exaggerated, odd form in front of Erming and Feng Xin, as if demonstrating its strength and beauty. The demonstration of beauty didn't last long, and Shilian moved again. He placed a plate on the ground before throwing over a big cabbage. Ruoye was just about to strike when suddenly Erming's eye flashed. It flew off the ground, whirling out shimmers of silver light. Leaves of cabbage filled the air, and as they landed on the plate, they had already been thinly and cleanly chopped. Shilian squatted down to pick up the plate and praised when he saw the cabbage. "Amazing," he said. "You cut better than Ruoye." Instantly, Ruoye pressed itself against the wall, looking like someone backing away and having nowhere left to run. Erming, however, started twirling its eye crazily, appearing fully cocky and content, like it had reached a state of sainthood. Between the saber and the bandage, Feng Xin still remained unmoved. Shilian hadn't noticed the little battle between the spiritual devices at all, and was focused on throwing all sorts of different veggies and seasonings into the pot. He turned to ask, "By the way, how long are you staying for this time, Sanlan?" Huacheng had been watching his actions the entire time. He had looked like he wanted to advise him of something at first, but in the end he said nothing. He smiled. "It depends," he said. "If there's nothing going on over there, I'll stick around here and play for a few days. If I hang around, pray Goga won't mind." Shilian hastily said, "Why would I, as long as you don't mind my place being a bit cramped?" Chattering and blabbering, Shilian told Huacheng about how the female ghost was deflecting blame, causing trouble the moment she arrived at the great martial hall. Of course, he refrained from mentioning how he himself was accused, and the whole business with dripping blood on Yan Jin. Then again, he remembered Junwu saying that Huacheng had planted a spy in the heavenly realm, so maybe Huacheng already knew everything. Fortunately, whether or not he knew, he made no show of it, and only looked contemplative. Shilian asked idly, "Sanlang, who do you think the father of that fetus spirit is?" Huacheng looked up and smiled faintly. "It's hard to say. Maybe that golden belt was just something she picked up off the ground." A vague response like this wasn't at all like Huacheng's usual style, and Shilian was puzzled. But soon a bubbling pot stole away his focus. After 2 incense time, he opened the cover of the pot. Usually, all Qirong ate were offerings to Shilian from the village people, although it was nothing more than steamed buns and pickles, noodles and eggs, wild fruit, or other such things. At least it was food fit for humans. The moment the pot cover was opened and the smell of its contents wafted outside Puchi's shrine, he started cursing deafeningly. "God, fucking Shilian, black-hearted snow lotus. You might as well just kill me with the blade right now. So acting all good, fishing me out, was to make me suffer this torture? I've seen through you." Before opening the pot cover, Shilian was full of confidence. Now he started doubting himself again. He had tried his best and exerted so much effort, but it had resulted in such an entree. Huacheng was still watching. Whatever should he do? Was he really going to make Huacheng eat something like this? Listening to Qirong screaming bloody murder, Shilian was becoming even more demoralized. Sensing that Huacheng had crossed his arms and was about to go out, Shilian raised his hand to stop him. "Never mind him," he said. He sighed, filling a bowl with the substance from the pot, and said to Huacheng, "Don't eat anything from this pot. Just wait for me for a second." Then he went out. He ushered Guzi and Lang Ying to go get a bucket of water sending them away from the premises. He squatted down with that bowl, looking pleasant and airy. "Little cousin," he said, "it's time to eat." Chirong was both shocked and terrified. "What?" he yelled. "What are you doing? What are you planning? Shelian, I'm warning you. I've a life in my hands. You better think this through. Whoever the hell eats that shit will break free from the bondage of the 3 realms and flee the Dharma wheel. No one." He trailed off when he saw Huachang, who was inside the shrine, ladle himself a full bowl. He sat down next to the altar table and took a bite, his face unchanging, steady like the mountains. Chirong was shaken to the core. A thought he had never had before flashed through his mind, as expected of a supreme. Shelian pushed the bowl against his face and said calmly, "It's fine. It's fine. If you don't want to eat it, you can come out." That was never going to happen. Chirong clamped his teeth tightly. However, Shelian squeezed his cheeks and forced open his mouth, dumping the contents of the bowl straight down his throat. The next second, a sharp scream shot through the skies above Puji's shrine. The bowl in Shelian's hand sat empty. Chirong, who was on the ground, bore a twisted, scrunched-up face, and even his voice was hoarse, like an old man wasted away. He groaned, "I hate." Seeing that even with the full bowl forced down his throat, Chirong still refused to come out, Shelian didn't know whether he should be glad or anguished, although he really wanted to force out Chirong as soon as possible. Since he didn't succeed, it almost seemed like it proved that what he cooked with all of his heart wasn't that bad after all. Perhaps it was even something worth being happy about. Turning around, he saw Huachang also had a bowl in his hand. He was eating leisurely, licking his way as he ate. That bowl was almost empty. Shelian's eyes lit up, and he rose to his feet. "Sanlang, you finished?" he asked. He thought that he had flopped the meal at first, and was too embarrassed to offer it to Huachang. But who knew Huachang himself went and started eating. Huachang chuckled. "Yeah," he said. Shelian prodded very carefully. "What did you think?" Huachang slurped up the soup and smiled. "Not bad," he said. "It's a little thick. Try making it a little lighter next time." Shelian sighed a breath of relief and nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll remember that. Thanks for your feedback." Behind him, Chirong let out a long moan.